this episode, we move from finding weaknesses to deciding what should actually happen next, because vulnerability management only creates value when discoveries turn into organized action. A scan result by itself does not reduce risk, and even a well-written report does not solve a problem unless someone builds a realistic path toward remediation. That path is what an action plan provides. For a brand new learner, it helps to think of an action plan as the bridge between knowing and doing, between identifying a vulnerability and making sure the right people address it in the right order. This topic matters because most organizations never have unlimited time, unlimited staff, or unlimited maintenance windows, so they cannot fix everything at once. Instead, they need a disciplined way to decide what gets handled first, who owns each step, how progress will be tracked, and what happens when a full fix is delayed. Good action plans bring structure to that work, prevent confusion, and help security teams reduce risk without creating unnecessary chaos across the business. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. An action plan for vulnerability management is a documented approach for addressing identified weaknesses in a controlled and accountable way. It explains what issue exists, where it exists, why it matters, what response is expected, who is responsible, and when progress should occur. That sounds simple, but many organizations struggle here because their vulnerability programs are better at discovering problems than driving follow-through. A team may know that outdated software, weak configurations, or missing patches exist, yet the work still stalls if there is no clear plan for remediation. A proper action plan gives people direction. It turns scattered findings into named tasks, assigns ownership, connects urgency to business impact, and helps keep the response aligned with operational reality. For a beginner, the key idea is that the action plan is not just a security document. It is a coordination tool that helps security, information technology, application teams, and leadership work from the same understanding of the problem and the same expectations for addressing it over time. One of the most important reasons action plans matter is that vulnerability management always operates under constraints. Systems cannot always be taken offline immediately, patches may need testing, vendors may not yet have released fixes, and business teams may depend on the affected platforms for daily operations. If an organization treats every vulnerability as a same-day emergency, it will burn out staff, disrupt business services, and eventually lose credibility. On the other hand, if it treats vulnerabilities as background noise, risk quietly grows until a serious compromise becomes much more likely. An action plan helps balance urgency with realism. It gives the organization a way to respond in proportion to the actual risk and the actual operating environment. That balance is not about being casual. It is about being deliberate. A mature security program understands that the goal is not dramatic activity for its own sake. The goal is to reduce meaningful exposure through organized, timely, and sustainable action that people can actually carry out. A strong action plan begins with a clear understanding of the vulnerability itself, because people cannot act intelligently on a problem they do not understand. The plan should reflect what the weakness is, what assets are affected, how the issue was identified, and whether the finding has been validated. This matters because some findings turn out to be duplicates, stale results, or false positives, and a weak plan that ignores validation can waste time and create frustration. Beyond the basic description, the plan should explain why the vulnerability matters in this environment. A public-facing system supporting customer access creates a different risk picture than an isolated internal test machine. A weakness affecting a critical identity platform deserves a different response than one affecting a non-essential utility server. Action plans become more useful when they include that context up front. Instead of simply saying a vulnerability exists, they frame the issue in operational terms so that the people responsible for action understand the exposure, the significance, and the reason this issue has entered the queue for attention. Prioritization is the next essential element, because action plans are really about deciding the order and urgency of work. Most organizations have more vulnerabilities than they can address all at once, So the plan has to help separate what is urgent from what is important, but manageable through normal cycles. Beginners sometimes assume the highest technical severity automatically gets fixed first, but real prioritization is usually more nuanced than that. The organization may consider internet exposure, business criticality, exploit availability, data sensitivity, user impact, and the likely consequences of compromise. A weakness with a lower severity rating may deserve faster action if it affects a high-value system or is being actively targeted in the wild. Meanwhile, a severe vulnerability on a tightly isolated system may still matter, but it may not sit at the front of the line. A good action plan captures that judgment clearly. It helps everyone understand not just that the issue needs work, but why it has been placed at a certain priority and what level of response is expected as a result. Ownership is where many vulnerability efforts either become real or start to drift. If nobody clearly owns the next step, the plan becomes little more than a statement of concern. Security teams often identify vulnerabilities, but they are not always the teams that can implement the fix. System owners, application managers, infrastructure teams, cloud administrators, and business leaders may all play a role depending on the environment. An effective action plan makes those responsibilities visible. It identifies who is accountable for reviewing the issue, who is expected to make the change, who must approve disruption or downtime, and who needs to monitor progress. This does more than assign blame. It creates a shared understanding of responsibility, so work does not sit in an undefined middle ground. For a beginner, it is helpful to remember that action plans succeed when they answer a very practical question: who does what next? If the document cannot answer that clearly, then even a well-prioritized vulnerability can remain open simply because every team assumed someone else was already handling it. Time is another critical part of an action plan, because action without a timeline is usually just intention. Good plans include target dates, review points, and expected response windows that match the seriousness of the issue and the reality of the environment. Some vulnerabilities may require immediate containment, some may be handled within a short remediation window, and others may be scheduled into standard maintenance cycles. What matters is that the timeline is visible and meaningful. It should reflect the organization's expectations and should be realistic enough that owners can carry it out. A deadline that ignores testing needs, maintenance windows, or production dependencies may sound decisive, but can fail quickly in practice. At the same time, vague timing creates drift and weak accountability. Strong action plans therefore connect urgency with time in a way that supports execution. They show when the work should begin, when it should be completed, and what happens if those milestones are missed. That gives managers and security teams a way to monitor whether the plan is moving or simply sitting still. Not every vulnerability is fixed in the same way, which means action plans need to recognize different response paths. In some cases, remediation will involve patching software or upgrading to a newer supported version. In other cases, the right action may be a configuration change, removal of an unnecessary service, tighter access controls, better segmentation, or a temporary compensating control while a permanent fix is prepared. A plan that assumes patching is always the answer can be too narrow and sometimes unrealistic. Vulnerability management is really about reducing exposure, and there may be multiple ways to do that depending on the situation. For a beginner, this is an important point because it shifts the mindset away from a single fix mentality. The plan should describe the chosen treatment clearly and explain why that approach is appropriate. It should also make room for the fact that technical remediation may not be immediate in every case. What matters most is that the organization has a reasoned response that lowers risk and is actively managed rather than ignored. Dependencies often shape whether a good action plan works in the real world, so they deserve more attention than new learners usually expect. A vulnerable application may depend on a vendor update that has not been released yet. A patch may require compatibility testing before it can be deployed safely. A system may support an essential business process that only allows maintenance during a narrow window each month. Security analysts can identify the weakness, but the remediation effort may still depend on infrastructure teams, business approvals, change management, and external providers. Good action plans account for those realities instead of pretending they do not exist. That does not mean the plan becomes an excuse for delay. It means the plan honestly reflects the work required to move forward. If dependencies are known, they should be documented so leadership understands why the timeline looks the way it does and what needs to happen to keep progress moving. Plans become stronger when they acknowledge operational friction early rather than discovering it only after the due date has already passed. Communication is another essential feature of a good action plan because vulnerabilities often affect people with very different technical backgrounds and priorities. The security team may care most about exploitability and exposure, while the system owner may be focused on uptime. The application team may be concerned about regression risk, and leadership may want to understand business impact and accountability. A useful action plan speaks to those audiences without changing the underlying facts. It explains the issue clearly enough that technical teams know what work is required, while also giving decision-makers enough context to understand why the work matters. Good communication keeps teams aligned and reduces the chance that a plan fails because of misunderstanding. It also helps avoid two common extremes. One is making the plan so technical that non-technical stakeholders ignore it. The other is making it so vague that the people who must implement the fix cannot act on it. Effective vulnerability action plans connect analysis to operations by translating risk into concrete, understandable next steps. Tracking and follow-up are what keep action plans from becoming static paperwork. Once a plan exists, the organization needs a way to monitor status, identify delays, and confirm whether the chosen remediation actually occurred. That means updates matter. A vulnerability marked for remediation should not simply disappear into a ticket queue with no later review. Security teams need visibility into whether deadlines were met, whether the issue was fully addressed, and whether the original exposure still exists. This ongoing monitoring is especially important in large environments, where hundreds or thousands of findings may be active at the same time. Without status tracking, action plans lose force and leadership loses confidence that the process is producing real outcomes. For a beginner, it helps to think of the action plan as a living commitment rather than a one-time document. Its value comes from continued movement, validation, and accountability. A good plan not only starts the work, but also supports follow-through until the vulnerability is remediated, mitigated, formally accepted, or otherwise resolved in a documented and defensible way. Some vulnerabilities cannot be fully remediated right away, and this is where action plans intersect with risk acceptance and exception handling. A system may be too fragile for immediate patching, a business dependency may delay change, or a vendor may leave the organization waiting longer than anyone would prefer. In those cases, the action plan should not simply end with the words delayed or pending. Instead, it should show what interim protections are in place, who accepted the temporary risk, how long that acceptance is intended to last, and what condition will trigger the next review. This is important because unmanaged delay is very different from controlled exception handling. One reflects drift, while the other reflects informed decision-making. New learners should understand that mature security programs do not pretend every issue can be fixed instantly. What matters is whether the organization can explain the delay, reduce exposure as much as possible in the meantime, and keep the issue visible so it does not fade into permanent neglect. A careful action plan helps make that discipline possible. There are also common mistakes that weaken vulnerability action plans, and knowing them helps beginners understand what good practice looks like by contrast. One mistake is writing plans that are too generic, such as simply stating that the affected team should fix the issue as soon as possible. That sounds useful, but it gives no real direction. Another mistake is failing to connect the plan to business context, which can cause teams to misjudge urgency or overlook important operational dependencies. Some plans assign work without naming true ownership, while others set unrealistic deadlines that collapse at the first sign of production risk. Another frequent problem is lack of follow-up, where the plan is created, discussed, and then effectively forgotten until the next audit or the next scan discovers the same issue again. Strong action plans avoid these traps by being specific, practical, contextual, and reviewable. They treat remediation as coordinated operational work, not as wishful thinking attached to a technical finding. That difference is often what separates mature programs from programs that appear busy but struggle to close meaningful risk. A simple example shows how this works in practice. Imagine a company discovers that several internet-facing servers are running outdated software with a known remote exploitation risk. A weak response might involve sending a vague alert to the infrastructure team and assuming they will take care of it when time allows. A stronger action plan would identify the specific servers, explain their business importance, note the exposure to outside traffic, validate that the finding is current, and assign clear ownership for testing and deployment of the fix. It would set a target timeline based on the seriousness of the issue, document any needed maintenance window, and specify interim protections such as tighter network restrictions or enhanced monitoring if the patch cannot be applied immediately. It would also identify who needs progress updates and when remediation should be confirmed. This kind of plan reduces ambiguity. It gives the organization a practical path from detection to closure while making it much harder for the issue to be lost, misunderstood, or delayed without visibility. By the end of this discussion, the main lesson is that action plans are the operational heart of vulnerability management because they turn findings into accountable, time-bound work. They help organizations decide what matters most, assign ownership, select the right remediation approach, manage dependencies, and track progress until risk is reduced. They also make room for business reality without allowing that reality to become a blanket excuse for inaction. For a new CySA Plus learner, this is the mindset worth carrying forward. Vulnerability management is not complete when a scanner detects an issue or when a report summarizes exposure. It becomes meaningful when there is a clear, practical, and followed-through plan for what happens next. Good action plans create that path. They bring order to competing priorities, make communication clearer, and help security teams drive real improvement instead of simply documenting problems faster than the organization can understand or address them.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.